Our guest today is an artist, poet, writer, Ms. Rosemary Mealy. We're pleased to have her here today. Ms. Mealy?
Well, I'm just really happy to be here too, because I was mentioning to you and also to our friend who directs this wonderful program that it's deja vu for me, because perhaps 15 to 16 years ago, I actually used to walk across those portals where I worked as a teacher and an artist here at Wiley. So this is really great, but it's far different than what it was then. It's really beautiful.
So thank you. I must confess that not having seen you in a number of years, I'm a little bit nervous.
Oh, you shouldn't be.
You're the gracious and beautiful lady that I remember. And I'd like the young people that will see this tape and the larger Wadley community to get a sense of that beauty and a sense of that intelligence and the sense of who you are as an artist and as a political activist. So if we can begin, I'd like you just to, as succinctly as you possibly can, to tell us who you are, what you do. I know that's a tall order, because it's difficult to compress all that you are into a few sentences or a few statements that you likely will make this afternoon. But I'm going to ask you if you would please be gracious enough to try and see if you could give us a sense of the essence of this meeting.
Well, I like to say that whenever someone asks me that question, I like to say that I'll try to landscape my life, right? So I'll give it a nice little turnover of the earth, because that's how I identify. I'm originally from the southern part of the United States, Virginia, of Native American, Indigenous American, Native American, and African American heritage. A heritage that's steeped in struggle and a lot of energy. A struggle of both peoples of survival and integrity and just the essence to want to bring our people forward in a full way. I grew up in the southern part of the country in segregated schools when it was the white and the black, and I hated it. And somehow imbued in me was this energy to challenge it. I refused to go to the white and black toilets. I wouldn't do it. It got to the point that when I was about 13, it was suggested to my father that if they didn't do something about that, quote, girl, something may happen to her. So I subsequently was sent to a boarding school where it sort of shifted and changed my life. I mean, it wasn't because it was punitive. It wasn't because they wanted to punish me. But at that time, the schools in the town where I grew up, actually the white folks closed those schools down because they didn't want to integrate them. So rather than to do that, they chose to defy the law, much like what we're seeing right now with another group of people in Miami defying the law. So I ended up going to this all-girls Catholic boarding school in Virginia, which was really interesting because it thrust me into a situation with young women from all over the United States. And then that led to when I graduated. I didn't go to college the first year of my graduation. I won a scholarship, but my parents were did not have the money to add to that United Negro Fund scholarship, so because they'd sacrificed so much to send me to this boarding school. So I subsequently moved to the north, to Philadelphia, where I ended up working for the telephone company, and I hated that too. It was just a kind of situation, a very oppressive situation, and I was always challenging my supervisors and what have you. But I then earned enough money, and I eventually got another scholarship, and I went to all places. I ended up going to school in Wisconsin, where I hardly saw any black people. I was the one of about 3 black women who actually integrated an all-women's Catholic college, and it was terror. I mean, physically terror, the kinds of assaults and verbal, not so much physically. But I endured it for a while. And then I decided that really wasn't what I wanted to do at that time, because I used to watch on television how our brothers and sisters, particularly in the southern part of the United States, even further down south, like in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, were being sicked on by dogs. So I decided that I was going to leave college and I was going to go and work in the civil rights movement. Well, my parents didn't take too great to this, except my father, who had been very political in the NAACP and had worked on the infamous Scottsboro case. And if some of the students don't know about that case, that's like one of the most important cases in the history of our people, because this is where black men were being accused of raping a white woman, and they were sentenced to die. And subsequently, many, many years, they were exonerated. But anyway, to make a long story short, the South gave me something else to work to. I actually began to develop my artistic skills even more so during that time, because I worked on a voter registration project where I was actually responsible for trying to find some way to teach poor black sharecroppers how to read and write. And with my interest in theater and in drama and in writing, I began to develop plays where, through the use of the theater, I began to teach 40, 50, 60-year-old people how to read and write, and through the music and the culture of the people. And that was very, very important to me, because I then began to see something about myself, that I could take this energy that I had, this energy to struggle against racism, but yet to use it in a creative way to push forth our people's struggle. So that was that period. And then over the years, I became a single parent. My son Mark was born during the 3 days after Malcolm was murdered, as a matter of fact. And when he was born, I sort of committed myself to the fact that in one of my poems, I say that I would teach my son as Malcolm had taught me. And so therefore, my son became my friend, my brother, and my son. And it's reflected in a lot of the things in the work that I've done. Subsequently to that period of being involved in working in struggles against racism, working in the street, working with young people, I taught for a while. I also I've worked as a domestic maid, you know, anything to be able to sacrifice so that I could propel and reach a goal. And my goal really was not so much to move into the arts as I ended up doing, but I wanted initially to be either a gynecologist or an attorney. But somehow I always had to keep pushing that on the back burner. My writing skills developed really well to the point that I published a lot, many, many times. And I've worked throughout Harlem. I've worked all over the country, really. I've traveled all over the world. I've lived and worked in Cuba, which was a wonderful experience for me. My writings reflect that. I was also a member of the Black Panther Party.
To hear you talk about what your life was like as a young person growing up in the South, I too am a product of the South. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, and I can remember vividly the white-only drinking fountains. In fact, much of my youth was spent picking cotton in cotton fields, and I remember the abuse and the difficulties that people of color had in just trying to survive in the South. In my particular case, it was Augusta, Georgia.
James Brown.
Exactly. But as I listened to you, I thought about your son. I may have mentioned this to you earlier, prior to this conversation beginning. And I asked you if you would consider sharing some of your craft with us. Having said that, I've turned to, for Mark, 1965.
Oh, okay.
And
well,
I'd
thank
like
you. I mean, you're probably the only person who knows where this was my first chapter. Okay. Thank you so much for bringing. Right, I wrote this poem for Mark, and I guess it does sum up what we've just been talking about. It goes, I am your mama, but most important, you're my son. That's equal. A few words spoken between us in soft tones say that. You came bursting forth with life 2 days after they murdered Malcolm. And as our people mourned, I looked at you and said, I'm going to teach you as he taught me. I am your mama. You are my son. It's the interchanging of our lessons that make us equal. And I guess that poem is really how I look at parenting. That if we respect our children, the fact that they have a sense of self, that they have the ability to think, that they have the ability to create, we can initially meet our children on an equal plane. And there's a kind of respect that young people can develop and evolve if they know that their elders, quote unquote, are on their side, and that they're not only your sons and your daughters, but they're your friends, you know. And that's how I view young people, that they're my friends. But the same way that we as adults demand respect of young people, we too as adults have to present ourselves so that they too can have that admiration and respect for us. And it's a give and take situation. And that's how I raise my son, to view adults as people, as individuals, really. And out of that, they can draw their own sense of whether you're being honest. And I think Tupac, in his music and in his art, talks a lot about that, you know, how to respect, but that you've got to earn, in some sense, that respect, even from your elders, you know.
I was reflecting quite recently on the epidemic of police brutality in the city, and indeed the Harlems of the world. So when I read this, dated 1965, and I started thinking about you, and I started thinking about Mark. When I saw you, I asked you, how old is Mark? And you told me that he's a young man now. As a mother of a young black man, which is a metaphor for all of the black men in this country, what do you think we can do as a community to combat this epidemic of police brutality?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Paul, because, you know, right now I work for I'm the public affairs director for a public radio station, WBAI Radio here in New York. And last week we held a forum. It was called Dorisman, Giallo, and Beyond. What is going to happen beyond? Does our community sit back and watch these killings? And then the police get off with impunity? Do we do that? Do we remain silent? I think the challenge for us now is organization. And I was so impressed last Wednesday with the hundreds of young people who showed up at City Hall, you know, with their own demands, and not so much with the adults marching with them, so to speak, but our being there to support them. I think that young people have every right now to raise issues, because it's really about their survival. And within our communities, we have to support our youth who are taking the initiative in an organized way to begin to raise these issues and how it impacts them. Maybe we need to take some lessons from them. I think in the churches, in the community centers, those of us who have skills, we need to be working more with young people, and that young people need to know that there are safe places, there are safe spaces for them. And our communities need to be organized around presenting those safe spaces. I recall that after Giallo was murdered by those cops, those white cops from New York City, in the New York City police force, when those youth demonstrated up in the Bronx, we created safe houses for them, because we knew that the police would pounce on them, would just try to move on them. And the youth knew that there was a community that would support them in a disciplined way. So I think the first thing that we need to do, we need to let our youth know that we support them. That's really important. And that in the music and the dance and the art and the culture, the rap artists have a responsibility also to translate the messages to our youth. Common, for example, has a bad CD out now. And one of the best pieces on Common's album is is a song entitled Asata. There's a real message in his music. We need to move away from the gangster rap to the kind of rap that has a message. And I think we need to encourage and support our youth who are doing that.
Since time is drawing nigh, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is whether your role as an artist or as a political activist, do you see them as mutually exclusive? Do you see, or what impact or influence has either of those roles made on you, and as you try to present a statement that will be of significance to the larger community?
See, I believe that art is political, that you can't separate your politics from your art. It's not art for art's sake. I've never believed that. My heroes are people like Baldwin and writers like Zora Neale Hurston who use art as a weapon, in a sense, as a tool.
Okay.
And that's what I try to do.
Okay. If I could end with this, Warren Garney wrote a poem called "She Does Not Know Her Beauty," and I'd like to share that with you as we conclude, as a message of thanks for your coming today. He said, "She does not know her beauty. She thinks her brown body has no glory. But if she could dance naked under palm trees and see her image in the river, she would know. But there are no palm trees on the street, and dishwater gives back no images." Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.